Thank you so much, Minerva. So welcome, everybody. We're very happy that we can still have this conversation on campus food insecurity. Thank you all for your flexibility in doing this conversation over webinar in lieu of our Alliance membership meeting that was previously scheduled this afternoon. We are so delighted to have Dr. Alicia Powers with Auburn University here to share an update on comprehensive approaches to addressing college student hunger. This is a follow-up to a conversation that the Alliance had hosted a couple of years ago with Dr. Harriet Giles, also from Auburn University. So we wanted to make sure that we had this conversation as soon as possible, and that we were able to get the content out to Alliance members. So thank you so much to you, Alicia, for having this conversation. I'm going to just briefly introduce you, and then I'll turn it over to you to get the presentation underway. So Dr. Alicia Powers serves as the Managing Director for the Hunger Solutions Institute. She holds a PhD in Nutrition and Food Systems from the University of Southern Mississippi, as well as an MS and BS in Nutrition and Food Sciences from Auburn University. Prior to joining the Hunger Solutions Institute, Alicia worked as an extension specialist and community health coordinator with the Alabama Extension Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program at Auburn University. And prior to that role, she served as the Associate Professor of Health Sciences at Furman University, where she also co-founded Live Well Greenville. So with that, Alicia, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks Danielle, and thanks Minerva for getting us all set up on GoToWebinar. And thank you all for joining us in the virtual world today. I do miss seeing each of you and being able to engage with you regarding this topic, but in light of the unprecedented situations with coronavirus or COVID-19, this is a very nice alternative. And so I appreciate the time that Danielle and Minerva delegated to ensuring we could continue on with this conversation, and for all of you in making adjustments to your schedule to be on today. And thanks Danielle for that introduction. Many of you on the call, and I'm sure Harriet is on the call, may know Harriet Giles. She was the most recent Managing Director for Hunger Solutions Institute. So I have the fortune or unfortune of filling her footsteps upon her retirement. She made a huge headway into involving universities in the fight against hunger, and I hope I can keep a little bit of that trailblazing going with the work I do in her place. So I appreciate Harriet and June's leadership in getting Hunger Solutions Institute founded and moving forward, and the opportunity they've given me to continue that work as Managing Director. So just very briefly, many of you likely know about Hunger Solutions Institute, but we do carry quite a few names. And so for those of you that may not be familiar with the Hunger Solutions Institute title at Auburn, we are the Secretariat for Presidents United to Solve Hunger, also known as PUSH, and Universities Fighting World Hunger, also known as UFWH. And so at Hunger Solutions Institute, our main endeavor is to harness the power of universities in the fight against hunger. And so we do that at both the top down with administrators, but also the bottom up through student grassroots work. We also have quite a bit of work happening here in the state of Alabama. As many of you know, we lead the nation in many of the things we don't want to lead the nation in, and one of those being hunger. And so we do have quite a few outreach activities through the Hunger Solutions Institute in order to lead the state in addressing hunger here in the state of Alabama. And so I am extending a conversation that many of you may have heard about from Harriet at a previous members meeting. And so I appreciate her setting the context and do not want to repeat the information that she provided, but I do want to remind you of that information because it has been a bit of time since you may have heard about that. I know she likely strongly suggested you dig into the recent GAO report that was released at the end of 2018, focused on college student hunger. And if you have not taken her up on that encouragement, I continue to encourage you to dig into this report. It is a lengthy but a very informative read, and it really gets to the nuts and bolts of what we're facing as the situation around college hunger right now and ways that we are seeking to address this. And so if you haven't at least read the executive summary, I encourage you to do so. It's a very good summary of what's happening in the world of college student hunger right now. And it is becoming just a bit dated when it's almost about a year and a half old at this point. But to reiterate a bit of the information that was shared in that report and through Harriet's presentation, you may recall that the prevalence of college student food insecurity ranges widely. And so this particular GAO report looked at 31 studies and found a range from 9% college student food insecurity to more than 50% college student food insecurity. But about 22 of those 31 studies reported rates greater than 30% for the prevalence of college student food insecurity. And so while the range is wide and the samples are not generalizable or representative of the entire nation's college student population, I think the width of the range and the placement of the majority provides great evidence on the situation that we're facing around college student food insecurity, and enough evidence that we can't ignore the situation. And it's definitely a population that may have not been thought about in the past in the hunger space. And knowing these numbers now has really brought this particular population to light in the hunger space and the fight against hunger. And so since that GAO report came out, we've heard a lot more about college student food insecurity, but we don't need to only hear more, we need to do more. And so that's what I want to talk with you guys about today. So just to remind you again, through that GAO report and some of the information that Harriet shared, we know the greatest risk factor for college students in the area of food insecurity is low income. But in addition to low income, there are additional risk factors that may place a student at greater risk for food insecurity. And those are first-generation college student, SNAP recipients, and single parents. And I've got some statistics on here, and I won't bore you with those details, and I know that you can read those. But I just want to draw your attention to the magnitude of these numbers. 7.3 million college students are low income. And so that is the first and greatest risk factor for food insecurity. So that's the number of students we're looking at that are at risk for food insecurity in the college time period. And then if we look at those additional risk factors, we see high numbers of 31% and 25% of those students who are low income that have additional risk factors. I also want to share and make sure that I draw attention to the fact that college student food insecurity and the prevalence of these risk factors is much greater at two-year institutions and colleges and schools than at four-year institutions. And so as we think about the colleges that we are tapping into for this work, we need to think about the characteristics of the students specifically. We also need to think about the characteristics and demographics that colleges are serving to know how to prioritize some of the colleges we should work with for our action and advocacy work. For those of you that are data nerds like I am, you'll enjoy seeing this. For those of you that are not, I will not belabor the point too much, except to say I want to draw your attention to these two bracketed numbers. Okay, so this 29% is showing us that 29% of undergraduates in the US are low income. So that's about a third of the population of college students in the US are low income and have one or more additional risk factors for food insecurity. So that's a very high number that we're looking to serve in the college area from a food insecurity perspective. But even more so, I want to draw your attention to this number in the far right. 75% of those students that are low income have one or more additional risk factors. And so I want you to notice the discrepancy in those numbers. While it's still a large number, a third of the college population being at risk for food insecurity because of low income, notice when you look specifically at those low income undergrads, 3/4 have one or more additional risk factors. And so again, that further helps us to really define the problem and define the challenge in a really specific way so that we can target our action and our advocacy efforts. So why is this important? We know it's a challenge. We know it's an issue that many college students are facing, but what are the reverberations because of this? What are the fallout or the outcome? Well, one of the main ones is decreased academic performance. And as a past traditional faculty member, and as someone who is still on a college campus, and many of you guys who are really seeking to raise up the next generation to be contributors and positive contributors to society, the decreased academic performance is of great concern. But also this decreased academic performance further inhibits these individuals in persisting and graduating from college. And in just 2017, the federal government invested $122 million in federal student aid. And so that investment is not always equating to persistence and graduation because basic needs are not being met. And so as we have these conversations around financial aid, we also must have conversations around meeting basic needs for this financial aid investment to really pay off so that all students can persist and graduate. And then, as with all other populations associated with food insecurity, we do see an increase in symptoms of depression and anxiety, other negative mental and physical health indicators. And I also want to reiterate this decreased academic performance is something that we talk a lot about in K-12 student hunger as well. And so I think it's a natural conversation to have as we talk about hunger in a student population. And I want to challenge you guys to not just think about students as K through 12, but think about those students in higher education as well as we talk about hunger in the student population. And so I want to shift gears now from talking about the challenge to talking about where current efforts are currently focused. There's quite a bit of work, a multitude of work being done in determining the prevalence of college student food insecurity. And as I mentioned, I love data and I love to define the problem with data. And so this is an important step, but I don't want this determination of prevalence to be our only step. And so I really want to challenge those of you who are on this call, who are participating in this determination, to encourage those you're working alongside to move to the next step once we understand the prevalence, to not stop at just understanding the challenge, but how are we going to address it? Also, many colleges and universities and other direct service providers that are nonprofits or non-governmental agencies or governmental agencies are now really focused, because we have an idea that college student food security is a challenge. They are now focusing on implementing direct services to combat this challenge. And again, this is definitely something that must be implemented. It's typically our first line defense in the hunger space to addressing food insecurity. But I also want to encourage here that this is not our last line defense against food insecurity in the college population. We need to get these direct services in place. We need to get those emergency food aid assistance pieces in place, but that doesn't need to be our only step in the fight against college student food insecurity. And then another place where some efforts are happening is advocacy for state funding and changes to state implementation of federal assistance programs, such as the way TANF is utilized in order to allow for work study and other participants in the college population to take advantage of SNAP through direct certification and things of that nature. Also state funding, that many of you probably know, the California legislature released quite a bit of funding to address college student food insecurity. The state of New York has issued. Some of our partners with Swipe Out Hunger are working with the state of New Jersey and Virginia and others to really address some state policy and state funding efforts that could provide some systemic change. And so this is where I want us to focus our future efforts. I don't want us to undermine determine the prevalence, and that's something that we're supporting at Hunger Solutions Institute. I don't want us to undermine the implementation of direct services, but I don't want those to be the only two things we do. I want to push forward and look at advocacy and building that public and political will to address college student food insecurity from a systemic perspective. And so what I want to use the remainder of the time is to talk about an effort that Hunger Solutions Institute is putting forward. And it looks very similar to an effort that the Alliance to End Hunger has been facilitating since 2010. And so I appreciate the opportunity to partner with Minerva on HungerFree Communities, but also the ability to work with universities in developing capacity and building capacity to address college student hunger at the university setting. And so I thought, since I was talking to the Alliance membership, that you guys would be fairly familiar with the HungerFree Communities. And so I devised this slide to show you how similar HungerFree Universities is to HungerFree Communities. And so most of you know that HungerFree Communities supports broad-based multi-sector coalitions. And that's exactly what Hunger Solutions Institute is doing in partnership with many universities here in the state of Alabama and throughout the nation and globe. Because as you know, when you build that coalition and you have that broad range of community stakeholders, you can get together a very common vision and strategies that can push forward to make sustainable change over the long term. And as you know, the Alliance supports those coalition efforts and collaboration among the coalitions. So just on Tuesday, I was on a call with HungerFree Communities talking about how to partner with universities in the HungerFree community efforts. And so Hunger Solutions Institute is also supporting coalition efforts of university coalitions to address campus hunger and offering platforms for collaboration and communication among those coalitions. And so you'll see a logo here for Alabama Campus Coalition for Basic Needs. And I'm not going to talk much about it right now, but I will say, and I'll talk about it closer to the end of the webinar, this is a specific effort that we're piloting in the state and planning to scale up to our UFWH and PUSH networks and other universities who have interest. And so I hope this slide gives you just a bit of a brief overview of what Hunger Solutions Institute is looking to support from a capacity building perspective for universities to address campus hunger. What I'm going to get into now is a bit more of the nuts and bolts of how we're building that capacity. I'm not going to bore you with the details. I have slides in here that will detail each of these steps, just so that when they're shared, you can have those for greater detail. But what I do want to share with you is that Hunger Solutions Institute has devised this process and is developing resources and a toolkit as a cohesive way to pull all of the resources together in order to, and I've said this a couple of times, in order to build capacity at the university level. So those of you that have followed campus hunger efforts during the past 3 to 4 years know that there's a lot of efforts that are coming up to help measure prevalence of food insecurity or to help establish food pantries in college campuses. Are to help share meals or share swipes. And all of those have a definite place in addressing campus hunger. So what Hunger Solutions Institute is doing is really trying to build the capacity at the university to take advantage of those resources. So we've devised this particular process in order to guide universities in developing a strategic plan so that they can position those resources at the time and place that will be most helpful. And so, as most of you, I'm sure, would echo this, HSI is not seeking to duplicate efforts that are happening. We're simply seeking to build that capacity and prop up universities in a way that they're ready to take on some of the resources that are out there in order to combat campus hunger. And so that's a bit of our framework for what and why we're devising hunger-free universities. And then to look a little bit at the details, these are the 6 steps that we support campuses and moving through in order to address campus food insecurity. Now, I want to say I have these labeled as numbers, but this is a cyclical and iterative process. So you might have to bounce back and forth between steps, and once you get to number 6, it doesn't mean you're done. You're usually revisiting number 1 and 2 or number 3. And so I simply have the numbers here to help you see the order that we're going to support universities in moving through this process. But there is no real beginning and no real end. It is a cyclical and iterative process. We, as I mentioned, will be devising a toolkit and resources and providing technical assistance and one-on-one support as we work with universities to move through this process. And we will have times and opportunities for universities to convene and collaborate among each other and share best practices as well. So the very first step that we're looking to support universities in accomplishing is to simply, and I say that very lightheartedly, engage a coalition. Most of you have likely engaged coalitions before and know that that is not simply done. And those of you that are familiar with universities know that we tend to be very siloed departmentally from a discipline perspective. And we're also very siloed in the places that we serve. For example, administration with academic and athletics, we're all tend to be quite separate. And so when developing coalitions in general, it's not an easy thing to do, but also when developing coalitions in areas where silos and compartmentalization is kind of the nature of the beast, it's even more of a challenge. And so as we've worked with universities here in the state and even worked here in our own university, we've developed materials and processes and resources to help colleges overcome those silos and overcome that compartmentalization and get the right people to the right table around this area of campus hunger. And so that's the first step that we're following And I will say from our Alabama Campus Coalition, we have 10 universities involved in our pilot effort. And between March of 2019 to October of 2019, all 10 developed a coalition of a very diverse group of people and have adopted a common vision. And so that was pretty superb and kind of surprising, particularly given the summer months that sometimes are downtimes at universities. After the coalition is engaged, we are then encouraging universities to look at 2 levels of data to consider where their situation is in the area of college student food insecurity. And so the first one is that obvious, the student level data of what is the situation around the prevalence. And there's quite a bit of assessment support out there. I know the Hope Center does quite a bit around prevalence of college student food insecurity. University of West Virginia is doing quite a bit. There's plenty of screeners and modules that are available. Those of you that are familiar with the American College Health Association, we now have 2 specific questions. The screener questions for food insecurity are included at no extra cost in the National College Health Assessment. And so the prevalence of college student food insecurity is one of the first levels of assessment. But what is important as we look to support campuses in developing a strategic plan is to not just know what the student situation is, but to reflect on the institutional situation. What's the campus culture? What are the current practices and supports and services, and what are the policies? And so Hunger Solutions Institute is actually devising an assessment called the Campus Food Aid Self-Assessment Tool to allow for this institutional level data to be collected. And so we're in the validation stage right now. And so we'll have a validated tool that universities and colleges and institutions of higher ed can use in order to have both student level and institutional level, so that they can look at those 2 levels of data together to make informed decisions for planning. And so what we're pledging to do for the pilot group here in the state of Alabama is we're receiving their prevalence level data, we're receiving their institutional level data, and we're pushing back a report that provides a snapshot of their assessment information so that they can use that information in planning. And that's the next step that we support the colleges and universities in executing, is to devise an action plan or a strategic plan. And this is something, again, that most of us are very familiar with, and we do sometimes on a more regular basis than we desire. But what I want to help universities understand in this situation is that we need to use those assessment results to inform our action plan. And I'm going to push those colleges and universities to think about sustainable systemic change. Again, get those emergency food assistance pieces in place, but then let's look at our practices and policies from a university perspective and how those can be shifted to prevent or to solve the long-term issue. So are there practices around financial aid, around state implementation of federal assistance programs that are limiting students' ability to access specific programs that may provide long-term support? And so we have tools that will help universities devise these action plans and tracking documentation to help them track those plans through to fruition. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is an iterative process. So once one goal has been accomplished, it's not check, we're done, campus food insecurity has been addressed. It's no check, we've accomplished that goal. Now let's go back to our assessment information. What's our next goal and what's our strategy in order to accomplish that next goal? And so it's a continuous improvement process. This particular graphic is from the GAO report, and it provides a snapshot of how many universities are currently combating campus food insecurity. And so you'll see the emergency aid, the research, educating faculty, staff, and students. It's embarrassing to say, but while campuses are the cornerstone for education, hence we're a higher education institution, we don't do a very good job of educating our faculty, staff, and students on issues such as campus hunger and other social or non-academic issues, if you will. And so that's something that we're really looking into as UFWH and push to raise awareness and to help build resources that we can educate universities on this particular issue. Many universities are devising nutrition, cooking, and budgeting classes. And again, with that emergency aid, have some food pantries and food distribution pieces in place. But if you want to know the future direction of addressing campus food security, it's what's in this box right here. Many universities are now looking at how can we centralize student services to get to those policies and practices that can really look at making systemic changes to address food insecurity. We were planning to be at University of Kentucky next week for our UFWH Annual Summit and Push Leaders Forum. And I have to celebrate with University of Kentucky being one of the first universities to hire a basic needs coordinator. And so they are well on their way to establishing the centralized student service. We have a study underway here at Auburn on what this could look like in order to centralize all of our student services. And we have an SGA president that was just recently elected, and this is her platform. So we're excited about that. And as many of you know, many of the University of California system schools are looking into this, as well as many other universities. And so this, to me, is likely the next 5 years for campus hunger as we look ahead at where the research will be and where the dollars will be and where much of the work on college campuses will be. So once our universities plan, they're then ready to take action and track progress and challenges. And we again have resources in place and technical assistance opportunities to support universities as they move through this. And then I'll echo that I am a data nerd and I am a past traditional faculty member, and so I will not let evaluation opportunities move past that can really serve as action-oriented research in order to inform the process. And so we will have process evaluation tools, outcomes evaluation tools, and impact evaluation tools in place so that colleges and universities can look at, are things being implemented the way they were planned? If so, what's the influence of that specific initiative on the food insecure population? And moving on into that impact area, has the initiative had an effect on students persisting and graduating? And I'm excited to say that Hunger Solutions Institute received a $500,000 grant from ECMC Foundation and is partnering with a researcher in the area of higher education to do some of this impact evaluation, to really look proactively but also retrospectively at how some of these common initiatives have been placed and their influence on persistence and graduation rates. So over the next 2 years, we'll have some really interesting data coming out and some tools that can be used as we follow these initiatives over time. And then lastly, with any coalition effort, it's important to not burden and overburden the coalition with the barriers and the challenges and the development of interventions without celebrating those successes. And even just getting a coalition together, we did press releases in Alabama about all the universities having their coalition and celebrate it with each university as they devise their coalition, because those of you that have helped to facilitate coalitions know how much work is put into that and just sustaining that. And so as initiatives launch, Alabama A&M University, one of our partner universities, recently received a small grant to launch their own food pantry, and so big press release and celebrated that. Tuskegee University launched a food pantry, and we celebrated that. And so really trying to build in ways to celebrate the successes so we don't get so overburdened with the challenge that we're faced. And so this is just a review of the process that we are developing resources and shepherding universities through in order to build the capacity so that they can access those assessment support through the Hope Center, or they can access Share Meals or Swipe Out Hunger in order to take advantage of sharing meals or sharing swipes. They can access the Campus and University Food Bank Association to develop a food bank. So really what we're seeking to do is to build that capacity at the university level so that they have a plan moving forward and can put these strategies into place based on assessment information and strategic planning. And so just briefly, I mentioned a little bit about Alabama Campus Coalition for Basic Needs as I was sharing the process. Hunger Solutions Institute is facilitating this coalition in addition to our End Child Hunger in Alabama network and our UFWH and PUSH networks. And currently we have 10 four-year universities who are a part of it. We will be launching our 2-year university group in August at an event here at Auburn. And the $500,000 grant helped to push this coalition forward. We'll be providing mini grants to our 10 four-year institutions for implementation of their efforts. So that's where half the funding is going. The other half of funding is going to researchers in order to look at what this cohort is doing that's working to support persistence and graduation, and are there specific types of institutions where certain initiatives work better and where other initiatives don't work as well. And so the ACBIN, as we like to say, is serving as our pilot for this capacity building process. The state of Alabama does not have a system of universities, and so we are excited to say we're one of the first states to have a state level effort that is not framed within a system. I spoke to Maine a bit ago, and they also are doing some state level work out that includes their system, but also is outside their system too. And so as we pilot and work through finalizing this capacity building process, we'll be ready to scale it up to our PUSH universities. We have more than 110 universities who have signed the President's Commitment to Food and Nutrition Security, and those that are working on campus hunger in addition to their local and global hunger efforts. This particular process will be made available to them, as well as our universities fighting world hunger, student grassroots, awareness, action, advocacy efforts. We will scale up our capacity building process to those student groups that can be implemented at their universities. And then as we work through the scaling up process and how we're able to balance resource development and technical assistance, we'll continue to offer this capacity building process to other institutions so that we can build a nice cohort across the nation and globe in addressing campus hunger from a sustainability perspective, so long-term solutions, with a coalition on the campus that's really driving the decisions and the strategy behind the work. And so that's where I'm going to stop. I've left some time for questions, and I think Minerva is going to facilitate that process since Danielle nor I are pros at GoToWebinar. But I welcome your questions, your comments, and any other points of conversation that you would like to have.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can ask your question. Also, you can type your questions. And Alicia, there are 2 questions already from Dave Miner if you want to look in your chat bar.
Okay, let me unmute. I was talking to myself. Dave Minor, that's what. Okay, so what do we know about quantitative impact on graduation rates? So right now we don't know a lot. And that's one of the reasons in the grant I wrote to look at that, and many funding opportunities now are focused on that because to date we know that campus food insecurity challenges persistence and therefore graduation, but we don't necessarily know much about how much it influences and if there's specific populations that are influenced more than others. And so that is a story still untold that we have pieces in place. We actually are submitting the IRB tomorrow in order to start to look at that quantitative impact and also the qualitative impact. Okay, and the next question dealt with Dave Miner said, a common metric in broader community is the meal gap. How many total meals are students short of? This quantification is helpful to design interventions. Has this been done for a university specifically? To my knowledge, the mapping the meal gap has not been done specifically at universities. Of course, we know that that's definitely a practice at the HungerFree Communities and is something that would obviously be helpful, and it's a place where we can go in the near future. Right now, what most of the work is looking at is that prevalence based on the screeners or the modules, and so that's a great suggestion for next steps as we continue to uncover the prevalence of campus food insecurity.
There are no other questions at this time, but we still invite people to raise their hand, and they can be unmuted and ask their own questions or make any comments they would like. No other questions at this time. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's a question from Rebecca. Are you familiar with the documentary from Soledad O'Brien on campus hunger?
Yes, and it is making its way around many university campuses. And so it's a great device to help communicate the information that many need to hear around the area of campus hunger. And Sarah Goldrick-Rab is featured in that documentary, and she is the founder of the Hope Center that was previously in Wisconsin and is now at Temple. And she's been one of the leaders in the movement to address not only campus hunger, but also campus basic needs.
Rebecca, you're unmuted if you wanted to ask further follow-up questions.
Just if there's any way that we could promote that and tie it to the work that you're spearheading. It seems like it's getting a good bit of traction, and thought it could be a nice tie-in if there's any way to make a connection.
Sure, of course. And I've had conversations with Sarah Goldrick-Rab as to how the Hope Center and HSI can partner.
Great. I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yes.
Thank you.
We do have another question from Zahra Zubik. What is the best way to get our university linked up with the Campus Solutions, the Hunger Solutions Institute? Do other universities other than Kentucky already have a strategic plan that are both short-term and long-term?
Oh, great questions. Sarah, you're most welcome. I think my contact information is still on the screen. You're most welcome to send that to any university that may have interest in this particular capacity building process, as well as push our Universities Fighting World Hunger. We're always looking to increase participation in those two networks. And that's where the majority of this capacity building process will be scaled to begin with. So please feel free to reach out to me. As far as specific universities who have action plans that are focused on addressing campus hunger, yes, there are many that have these in place. Some have been informed through assessment, some have been informed by coalitions, and some have not been. And so there are plenty of universities who see campus hunger as an issue and a challenge and a barrier to graduation and are addressing it very strategically. But there are still plenty of universities who do not realize this is a challenge or do not have a coalition in place to collectively and strategically address it, or do not have an action plan. So some of the universities that I've mentioned, like University of Kentucky, many in the State University of New York system, the University of California system, our group in Alabama will have action plans by the end of the summer. And so there are plenty that are moving forward. But what we're trying to do is really to pull together those that are not and those that have, so that we can work among each other as well. So if there's a specific solution that's working well in one location, can we scale it to other locations and see if it works as well? So yes, the long answer is what I just said. The short answer is there are plenty of universities that are addressing this strategically.
Great. And Sarah's with Duke University. I've unmuted you in case you have any other follow-up questions.
No, that's great. Thanks. I'd love to follow up. We just had a big event on campus food insecurity at Duke University, and our VP of Student Affairs was very involved, and the provost and some others. So I think now the time is right to kind of check in with you all about next steps.
Sounds great. We can get we would love to get your president to sign push and start moving forward with all of these steps. That would be wonderful.
Great. Yeah, I might have to wait a little bit because Duke is all shut down right now. So
I understand. Yes,
yeah.
I did recently read that.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, now more than ever, I'm sure we've got some students in need. So there we go.
Yes.
Well, thanks, ladies. I look forward to following up.
Of course.
Dave has a few more questions. So Dave, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can share your questions. Just give me a second.
Hi, Alicia. This is Dave Miner. Thank you. This is fantastic. I think you may have said it, but I missed it. When do you expect to roll out the toolkit that you've overviewed for us?
Of course. Yes. So we are, as we pilot it with our Alabama group, we are developing the toolkit. And so by the end of the summer, we'll have all of the pieces developed. And we'll be ready to, we're then going to move it into the two-year universities here in Alabama, and we'll be ready to scale it to other universities as well. And it will be a web-based toolkit, so anyone can access it that wants to follow this process. And then we'll obviously be available for technical assistance to support universities as they move through this process.
I mean, I've got I have a meeting tomorrow morning with my local university, and I want to tell them about, that you've done all this work that, could help them if they would take this task on. So
absolutely, we would love for you to share that.
Okay.
And you're most welcome to share my contact information for next steps.
Great.
Olivia has a question. Olivia, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Hold on a second. Olivia, it looks like you're self-muted. Did you want to ask a question or do you want to type it into the question bar? Okay, so just sharing Olivia's question. She's with us at the Alliance, one of our AmeriCorps Vistas. Her question is about centralizing student services. How is that playing out in universities? So can you give us a better sense of how that might actually work, Alicia?
Sure. So centralizing student services can run the gamut of physically centralizing it to structurally and infrastructurally centralizing it to kind of in everyday practice centralizing it. So it can look different based on how far the university wants to take that. So the initial step is typically the physical centralization. So getting all of those offices in somewhat of a close proximity in what some are terming basic needs hubs, so that students who need to access one particular office may not even realize another office and another service is available. And so having it centrally located will promote greater access to the multitude of opportunities that may be available at the university. If you take it to the next level, past simply physical centralization to looking at, from a structural and an infrastructure perspective, how can some of the practices be centralized? So can universities use the system of financial aid to help identify those students who may be at risk for food insecurity, but also other basic needs supports? And so looking systematically at how the university does particular office practices and how those can be integrated in order to help with identification and service of the students. And then kind of the in-between of those two ends of the spectrum is not, are they just physically in close proximity to each other, and then maybe they're not all the way to the point of systematically all the systems are working together and all the policies and practices are working together, but do they just know about, do the individuals working in those offices know about all the other services and can kind of serve as somewhat like a case manager in order to connect them? And so some universities are following this case management approach where they actually employ case managers that serve as that kind of hybrid centralization system. For example, University of North Alabama here, they have a case manager who serves on our statewide coalition, and she stays in touch with all the offices that facilitate support and helps to ensure the students have access to it. And so it can run the spectrum, and most oftentimes universities start with physical centralization and then move to the case management approach. And that case manager then helps to identify the hot spots where the system and the policies and practices can be changed in order to centralize. So it kind of moves across that spectrum.
Thank you so much. It doesn't look like we have other questions at this time.
Great. Alicia, this is Danielle. I just wanted to, on behalf of the Alliance and our membership, thank you so much for sharing the latest information with us, both on the alarming realities of this vulnerable population, but also, you know, how the Hunger Solutions Institute is leading the charge and all that you are doing as far as the capacity building with universities goes. So I just wanted to share that the Alliance is committed to this issue and to continuing to share the latest from you all and from our members on this. This webinar will be live on our website following, or will be up on our website following this conversation, and we would be happy to continue sharing both the toolkit as you have that at the end of summer, and any additional information that you have we'll make available to our members and continue to advance this conversation. So thank you so much, and I think with that we will end the webinar.
Great, thank you all.